I'm so glad that we're able to do this. I told everybody about this live. I'm here with Tal Taylor, who is a labor and employment attorney, and we're going to meet her right now. Tal, thank you so much for coming over.
Thank you so much for having me. Good morning.
And so tell me what brought you into this? Why are we doing this live today? Share with us some stuff.
Sure. Well, I am a member of the group, and I do have personal experience having caregivers offer us assistance in my family, and I understand firsthand how complicated the employment laws are in California in general, and how difficult it is to navigate the changes that take place within the state on an ongoing basis, especially in employment law. And so I wanted to impart some of my personal experience and knowledge in this field in the hope that I might be able to help some of our members here.
Well, thank you so much. I so appreciate you coming over to my backyard. And I am like everybody else. I apologize if there's background noise. There's a little bit of construction in a house behind me. So labor laws, caregivers, it's a very hot topic. It's been a hot topic on elderly. What wisdom can you impart for us?
Well, I think the most important thing I can share, sort of in a global sense, is that the laws change on the regular. And they don't always change on the first of the year, which is, something that we sort of assume as the year ends, we can start to get up to speed on things that are coming that might impact our relationships with our caregivers, but that's not always the case. And one such example has to do with minimum wage.
Okay.
So there are different rules that apply to the minimum wage rates. There is a state minimum wage that California sets, but then local municipalities can also implement their own minimum wage rules, and you don't get to choose which one you abide by. So for example, the city of Los Angeles has its own minimum wage rate, and that rate doesn't increase on the first of the year. It actually changes July 1st every year.
So this coming week?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's something important to keep in mind, that even though the state minimum wage will go up on the first, the minimum wage in the city of Los Angeles is going to hit $15 an hour come the first. And another example of a local municipality that has its own rate is the city of Santa Monica. So to anyone who has caregivers working for them in either city, and to the caregivers, it's important to keep in mind that the rates change, and if you are working with a minimum wage rate, you need to make sure that you're acting in accordance with the current standard.
So one question that seems to come up a lot is the idea of a caregiver being an employee or an independent contractor. Can you shed some light on that? That's a bit confusing for people, I think.
It is confusing, and it's certainly been a hot topic in California in a variety of industries in the last several years, with some new laws having been enacted that actually make it pretty difficult to declare that someone is an independent contractor. So what I like to tell people is, if there's a question as to whether someone is or isn't an independent contractor, the default is going to be no. In most instances, the person performing work is an employee, and there are a number of exemptions that apply that are listed in the legislation that governs this subject. But with respect to caregivers specifically, in most instances, private caregivers are employees. And the difficulty is that you don't have the option to choose.
Okay.
So it might seem easier to set up an arrangement, and even if you're on the same page with the person that you're hiring, and you both decide, let's just make me an independent contractor, it's easier, we'll sign a piece of paper, I don't have to deal with deductions, you handle your taxes. Unfortunately, that's not legally compliant. So that's something, you know, that we have to keep in mind, and make sure that, you know, people who are legally employees are being treated as such. And what that means logistically is that they have to be on payroll
Okay.
with deductions. There are separate rules that dictate what actually has to go in a paid statement and a wage statement. You have to have workers' comp insurance. There are a lot of things to think about that, you know, understandably cause people to prefer to set up an independent contractor relationship.
So when in doubt, kind of lean towards the idea of an employee.
Yes.
And find out the details for that.
Right.
So tell me about payment, daily, weekly rate, what guidance do you have there?
So another thing that I see often that comes up with caregivers is that, you know, we tend to reach these sort of informal agreements where we'll say, you know what, I need X number of hours. It's generally the same every week. I'll just pay you a fixed rate, you know, once a week, whatever that dollar amount is, and that'll just cover whatever services you perform during that week. The problem is, unfortunately, that under the law, under the labor code in California, there is a law that dictates that if you call something a fixed rate, you are in fact only paying that person for regular non-overtime hours. So what that means is if you go and start to divide the number of regular versus overtime hours that that person would be entitled to, they're actually not getting the overtime hours, which makes the rate much, much higher if you think about it.
Oh, okay.
So it's really important not to use a fixed rate, a daily rate, a weekly rate, however you articulate it. It's really important to focus on regular hours versus overtime hours at, you know, whatever rate you agree upon, so long as, of course, you at least pay the minimum wage that applies.
Okay. Regular overtime, not a fixed rate.
Right.
So another question I remember coming up when I was, you know, looking at potentially having caregiving for my mom was the idea of caregivers are not robots and they need to sleep. And what are the laws around sleep and caregivers, particularly during nighttime hours?
Sure. So this is another really tricky area, and in fact, the courts are not fully settled on the subject, but there is nevertheless guidance, which tells us that in most cases, nighttime hours are compensable. So, you know, you may have a live-in caregiver who really doesn't necessarily need to do much at night.
Okay.
You want them there for security or in case of emergency. Unfortunately, the recent laws tell us that so long as that person is under the control of the employer, which means, you know, they can't leave.
Okay.
You need them there during their shift, including at nighttime. They really need to be paid for those nighttime hours. The only exception to that is if they are a live-in housekeeper, and then this is sort of where we get into the subject of a personal attendant versus a housekeeper. It gets complicated. The issue is that if you are a personal attendant, which really applies to most caregivers,
Okay.
it means that you're spending the bulk of your time performing actual caregiving services, right? So you might do a little bit of housekeeping, a little laundry, cleaning the kitchen, things like that, but the bulk of your duties are caregiving services, then you're a personal attendant.
Okay.
And what that means, to answer your earlier question, is that you need to be paid overtime for any work above 9 hours per day or 45 per week, and that includes sleep time, unfortunately.
Thank you. So, COVID-19, vaccinations, caregiving, looks like things are getting better. People are more willing to have caregivers. What guidance can you give us around COVID-19 vaccinations? Can you ask for them? Can you not ask for them? Can you ask for people to wear masks?
Sure, and this is certainly a timely subject, and I've seen a lot of discussion within the group on these issues because they really do come into play in all of our lives in some fashion every day. And what I can tell you from a legal standpoint, with respect to vaccinations, California and federal law allow employers to require that their employees be vaccinated in order to maintain their employment. Now, the exceptions, which, of course there's always an exception.
Always.
If the individual has a disability or a sincerely held religious belief that, interferes with their ability to be vaccinated, their job would still be protected so long as you can figure out a way to reasonably accommodate that situation.
It's interesting that a religious belief falls under that too.
Sure.
That's interesting. One more question, because I want to be cognizant of the time. And one of the things I'm going to say to you with LA Elderly, if this was helpful, Tal is a wealth of information. She's offered to come back. We could do a part 2, but let us know in the comments. And maybe some questions that you might have after this that come up. And we will maybe do a part 2 in my backyard. I'd love to meet with Tal again. It's been great. Last question. An interesting question in our times. So can you advertise an opening for a male or female caregiver? Can you designate that?
Another really interesting topic, something that again I see that comes up virtually every time I see postings for caregivers. I feel like more often than not I'm seeing somebody advertising for a specific gender. What I can tell you is that as a general premise, it is unlawful to advertise for a job opening that is limited to a certain protected class.
Oh, okay.
Now, the exception to that, it's called a bona fide occupational qualification. With respect to caregivers, that exception would be with respect to privacy issues. So obviously, when you have a caregiver, they're involved in an intimate setting, they're taking care of you physically, they have contact. It's understandable that you'd want to maintain that separation and hire somebody that's of the same gender. The one thing to think about though is that doesn't extend further to, for example, well, I think males are just stronger and I need someone to help transport me in and out of vehicles, in and out of my home. Males do not have the market on strength.
Okay.
And so we need to be cognizant of that if that is the premise behind which we are seeking out a particular gender.
So it seems like overall, when I think about everything you've said, that when you think about a caregiver, and I'll kind of turn this a little bit more to LA Elderly, and tell me if I'm wrong, but when you think about a caregiver, and again, I've been following in the group, I think the way you advertise for a caregiver really has to be thoughtful and has to be thought through the lens of being legal and being appropriate. So I think I'll leave us with that. And again, if you have any questions, put them in the comments. I'm going to put Tal's information in the comments. If we want a part 2, please let us know. And Tal, I thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your time today and coming over and helping us understand this, because I know a lot of people in LA Elderly are navigating a very tricky situation as we come back.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for all that you do in this group. It's a tremendous resource that I think more people should take advantage of.
Well, thank you. Well, it takes a team effort. All right, everybody, have a wonderful day. I will talk with you soon. Bye-bye.